Our guests today are a trio of Shearman and Sterling partners up in New York City, Richard Alsop, Jillian Emmett Moldowan, and Kristina Trauger, who are part of the team that authored the 18th Annual Corporate Governance and Executive Compensation Survey. That survey covers the top 100 public companies by market cap and revenue. It's quite an undertaking. Thank you for doing it. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So ESG disclosure trends, not just proxies, but also in the E and S, ESG, sustainability reports. I contend that one day the amount of acreage in a proxy statement about ESG might rival executive pay, but I could be wrong, but I think it's important. We'll continue to grow. Kristina, what are you seeing in both the proxy and outside?
Sure, thank you, Brock. Yes, ESG has been the hot topic for a few years now, and it really remains a primary focus of companies and investors this year, with an increasing shift towards social issues. In our proxy statements and the CSR reports were drafted in earlier this year before a lot of the events had fully played out of 2020. However, even though they weren't fully reflective of the impact of this year's events, there are certainly some key trends that I'm sure will only be heightened in 2021 proxy statements and CSR reports. So first of all, by and large, all large companies, in fact, do either issue a CSR report as a corporate social responsibility report, or host a fully ESG dedicated website, which they regularly update and issue their reports under. And it can be called many different things. So don't be fooled if it's not called the corporate social responsibility report. They're also called sustainability or environmental reports, ESG reports, or the trending impact report. Most companies issue their CSR reports after their annual meeting. They do not include the CSR report with their proxy materials typically. And there's really still no consensus on the reporting standard that companies use. And many actually refer to multiple reporting standards. So there's no change there. However, an interesting development this year is that the Big Four accounting firms have designed their own set of standards in an attempt to sort of create some sense of standardization across companies. So that remains to be seen whether companies will pick up on that and shift to using that standard. There's also been a big shift this year in particular on the number of companies that state that they have a chief sustainability officer. So an officer really dedicated to ESG issues. In fact, I've had the pleasure of speaking to a few of them this year about some of the relevant issues. They've had a very busy year in 2020. So that's been a really interesting development. Some of the topics that are focused on in these reports, again, it's still sort of predictable, sustainability, employee support, diversity, climate change, human capital management all remain to be top subject matters of the reports. However, we have seen an increase this past year on issues such as human rights, citizenship, and privacy and data security, which certainly has been trending in public company disclosure, but has been a sort of a key focus recently in the CSR reports as well. As far as oversight for ESG issues, it really tends to be delegated to the Nomination and Governance Committee, with the board having overall oversight over these issues, recognizing the importance and that the board needs to stay up to date and have input. But by far, most companies delegate, the primary sort of the day-to-day responsibility to the Nom and Gov Committee. Another sort of growing trend in ESG issues and disclosure that we've seen is the inclusion of some of the top companies of their green bond offerings, information about those offerings in several different reports. It's, almost always in a press release, of course, but they've also started including information on their green bonds in their CSR reports and or their proxy statements, and sometimes in their quarterly and annual reports as well. So that's been an interesting development. some of the top categories for the focus of these bonds are for, the use of proceeds is for green buildings, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable water and wastewater management. Most of them do, in fact, still use the green bond principle. So that's been a growing trend over the past few years. And then this year, it's been interesting because we've seen, as an aside, not necessarily in the CSR reports, but just from sustainable investing perspective, we've seen a rise in the social bonds this year, in particular, in response to COVID. We've seen the COVID bonds make an appearance, which the purpose of the bond, the use of proceeds, is to address the impact of COVID-19. So that was an interesting development this year as well. I think that the largest and the most impactful changes have been made with respect to human capital management in the ESG arena. We've really seen a shift in investor sentiment that the workplace considerations and human capital management can in fact be material to shareholders and do require sort of the heightened oversight of the board. This used to be seen as really just an area of management responsibility, and there's been a big shift over the past few years, but in particular this year, in that it's not just a management responsibility, that it really does require board oversight and board input to make sure that it's part of the company's overall sort of risk assessment and strategic planning. This idea also led to the SEC adopting a new corporate governance disclosure requirement this year that requires public companies to describe, to the extent material to its business, the company's human capital resources, including the number of employees and any human capital measures or objectives that the company focuses on in managing the business. COVID has certainly heightened this idea of the importance of risk management and really long-term strategic planning that focuses on workers outside of just the executive group. That is really, in fact, a board issue, and that the focus really needs to be on planning. And I think the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce this year, whether in response to, layoffs or their health and safety, or, adjusting to remote working environments, has all had such a large impact on the workforce that I think this concept has become very real to management and board teams alike in the need for strategic planning. And some of the ways that the board can manage this planning process, really beginning to collect data, if it's not already, on retention and turnover rates, on labor practices, health and safety, engagement, diversity, inclusion, all of these really important issues to maintaining a workforce, and being able to compare that data to prior year data and see how the company's doing, and being able to evaluate the company's efforts is really important. And then you're also able to benchmark against your peers once you've had this data collected. And then you also have discussions once you have a better picture of how you've been able to manage your workforce, on how that data really relates to your goals and your strategic management of your employees going forward. And then I think cybersecurity, one last sort of important trend that we saw was, of course, an increased focus on cybersecurity, especially as it relates to being overseen by the board, specifically the audit committee, and how that interplays with your workforce as they've been working remotely from home.
Yeah, the proxies really expanded in recent years, and for good reason, with a lot of these topics. That was great, Kristina. I should mention Jillian's on a separate Vid-Guide as part of the Proxy Season Spectacular Proxy Conference regarding human capital management, so you want to look for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.